G'day, I'm George Christensen, former Australian Member of Parliament and host of the Conservative One podcast. And joining me for this episode is someone who's probably very unexpected, and that is the one and only David Icke. Now, he's been much maligned by the mainstream media and the political establishment as a conspiracy theorist, but haven't so many of us lately. And as they say, the difference between a conspiracy theorist and we're hearing the news these days is about 6 months, and that gap's closing. But look, there's a lot of what David has to say that I disagree with, but on another level, on a macro level, what he says has the ring of truth about it, particularly when you look at what's happened over the past 2 years with the pandemic. And so I want you to be the judge. I'm not going to censor what David has to say. I'm going to let him say it during this interview, and for you to be the judge of his reflections, of his perceptions. Now, it's just a sad reality that when I interview someone like David Icke that you're not supposed to talk to, if you come from polite political society, that I'm going to have this taken down if I put it up, and perhaps even be deplatformed myself if I put it up on mainstream social media channels like, for instance, YouTube and Facebook. I might put snippets of it up there, but I won't be able to put the full interview up there. That's a great shame, because we need freedom of speech. We need freedom of speech even for those who are opposed to what David says or what I say, to be able to successfully and accurately rebut that. If you're not going to hear from the argument in the first place, how on earth are you going to rebut it? But these are the times we live in. And I guess, again, it sort of adds to the ring of truth about what David Icke says, at least on a macro level. So without any further ado, here's the interview with the one, the only, David Icke. Well, it's a pleasure to be joined by David Icke. Lots of people know David, and you see I've been accused by the mainstream media, the fake news legacy media, of being a conspiracy theorist, and David Icke is always referred to as a conspiracy theorist. So I thought I'd go to the expert and ask him straight up. David, joining us all the way from London, can you tell me what's a conspiracy theorist, and give my viewers a little bit of a history lesson about yourself?
Well, if you take the last 2 years, a conspiracy theorist is someone who says this is what's really happening. They then get silenced by social media and the media in general, or demonized. And then what they said turns out to be true. That is basically it.
A bit of a gap of about 6 months, something like that, and closing.
It's getting smaller. So the was it someone said, put it brilliantly. They said we've reached the point where yesterday's conspiracy theory is today's breaking news, which I thought was excellent. But it's worth just looking back about where this nonsense came from. So in the 1960s, of course, there were a lot of assassinations going on. People like Edgar Hoover at the FBI were heavily involved in all that. The Kennedy assassination, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, and so on, Malcolm X. And there was these strange people in America at the time that didn't believe that bullets do U-turns, really, when they were looking at the Kennedy assassination. They didn't buy the idea that bullets were the same bullet, magic bullet, has to be, went through several people in a car to explain the official story and how it must have happened like that. So they didn't buy that. And of course, the official story, as with COVID, human caused climate change, all of it, is so ludicrous. It can only be defended by censorship and demonization. So what the CIA did in the 1960s, I think it was about 1967, is and you can find this document on the internet. They contacted major media organizations in America and urged them to use the terms conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorist to discredit those that weren't buying their nonsense about these assassinations. And this then became the mantra. And you've got all these mainstream journalists. I was a mainstream journalist for a long time on newspapers, radio, television, eventually sport with the BBC. From about 1973 through to 1990, I was a journalist a long time. And I can tell you, having worked on the inside, that you do not have to be intelligent to be a journalist. In fact, it could be a bad career move. You certainly don't have to be informed. What you have to do is stay within the tram lines of what is acceptable to report. And in my day, the restrictions were nothing like as narrow as they are now. So you are dealing with people who are utterly uninformed, who have a career to protect, and they know if they go outside the tram lines, which are getting narrower all the time, then that career is in great danger. And so they put aside what journalists should be doing, which is seeking out the truth, no matter what it is, and they do the opposite. They do the inversion. Everything in this world is inverted because the consciousness behind it is inverted. And so they don't seek out the truth. They parrot and propagate lies. And so if you're going to control the perceptions of the population, which is what you have to do, that's the stadium. That's where it's all played out. It of course plays out in what we call a physical way in human behavior, and not questioning behavior and acquiescent behavior. But that behavior comes from perceptions, the perceptions of the people. We behave as we do because we perceive as we do. And that's why information, control of information, is so absolutely vital, because from information received comes perception, which then goes through to behavior. So the media has to be controlled. And the more ludicrous your story is, the more you have to control. Because if you have some kind of credible cover story, even if it's a cover story, it has a certain credibility, then you can maybe argue that with people in public that have a different view. But when your cover story has no credibility, then the only way of protecting it is to silence any dismantling of it in the public eye, which is what Silicon Valley is about, the mainstream media is all about. And so in the 1960s, they had a problem because the Kennedy assassination increasingly made no sense whatsoever. And then there was all these other assassinations. Well, it's like, it's a bit of a coincidence in it. People keep getting killed when they speak out against the government. And so they started this process of the conspiracy theorist label, which, like I say, all these years later, today's excuses for journalists are parroting this by reflex action. Hey, he's a conspiracy theorist, having no idea whatsoever about anything, but certainly where conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorist actually came from, which was the CIA. And you'll also notice, George, that and I've seen this so many times myself in the last 2 years alone, you'll say something and they'll say conspiracy theory, nutter, or dangerous, misinformation. And then it turns out to be right. But they never say, well, actually, this guy was right. No. The next time you say anything, that's misinformation, even though you've been proved right on other things. So it's nothing to do with what, conspiracy theory and all that stuff. It's nothing to do with what you're saying in terms of whether it's credible or not. It's to do with if what you're saying is dismantling the official narrative or not.
Mm-hmm. So can I just get to the second question? who is David Icke? Because there's probably some of my viewers who may never have heard of David Icke before, believe it or not, but you have been, like me and so many others, much maligned. Tell us who actually is David Icke. Let's do away with the mainstream media narrative, with the Wikipedia narrative, with all the rest of that nonsense, and you tell us who you are, sir.
Yeah, the Wikipedia narrative. I love them. If you're outside the mainstream, they are hilarious. The Wikipedia pages. I mean, they turn lying into an art form, and they call it an encyclopedia. But what happened is that I was born in the English Midlands, a place called Leicester, and I went to school in the 1950s. I was born in 1952, just coming up to the 70th birthday. And I wanted to be a footballer, and became a footballer. Then arthritis finished my career at 21. And my second string, I'd always been interested in it all through my, growing up, was journalism. And so I went into newspapers and then radio and eventually television. And then I moved from news to sport with the BBC. And then I became a national spokesman for the British Green Party in a ridiculously short time. It was just insane. I joined the party, and within 8 weeks, I'm a national spokesman for the Green Party. Just ridiculous. But anyway, that's another story. And that has absolutely been vital in my understanding. I wasn't in the Green Party that long, because I saw that politics was part of the problem, not part of the solution. I saw that very early on. I also saw that the Green Party that claimed to be different actually wasn't. It was just different color rosette, but the mentality was the same. But even then, the Green Party and the Green Movement was nothing like as extreme as it is now. It was much more focused on genuine damage to the earth, pollution and deforestation and all that stuff. Which is laudable. But what's happened to the Green Movement since I left it a long time ago, 1989, well, 89 really, is that human-caused global warming, which is a global cult hoax, which we're now seeing to justify the transformation of global society, that has taken over everything. And the other things, like, all these in my day, again, in the Green Party in the 1980s, the idea of having these plastic, bloody useless, bloody face nappies, face diapers, every bloody where, in the sea, in the rivers, in the street, we would have gone, what? Absolutely not having this. But the new Green Party, the new Green Movement, not a problem, because it's just been co-opted by what I call the global cult. But to see the Green Party from the inside, and to see the mentality, and then to see it even more extreme than it was then, far more extreme than it even was then, has been very useful to me. So, it's a lot of things that happened in my life before I moved into this 32 years ago, that were very, very instructive for what was to come, although I didn't know at the time that it was coming. And so then I had a series of what you might call paranormal, some might call it spiritual experiences. I don't mean religious, but paranormal experiences, which blew my head off and launched me into a whole new understanding of the world. And I started off in the early 1990s. I made historic levels of ridicule, because I was a well-known figure in Britain on the telly and everything. And suddenly I'm coming out with this stuff, and it was like, what's happened to Ike? He's gone mad. He's having a midlife crisis. He's having a breakdown. What I was having actually is a breakthrough the crap to see beyond it. And so from then on, I've been researching, and my life has been extraordinarily synchronistic, where the information's just come to me from all these different sources in all these different ways. A subject will come into my life, and then suddenly, from that point, information's hitting me from all angles about that subject. It's been happening for 30 years. It's just part of life to me now. And what I've done is just put all the strands together to to kind of construct this hidden network and put it on public display. And so when COVID came along, I mean, it was obvious to me what was going on because of what I'd researched before. This is a global network of secret societies. I call it the global cult. And there's a spider at the center of the web. And a spider's web is the most perfect analogy for how this web operates, how it connects. We've got the spider at the center of the web, and it's dictating the direction of human society. And then the strands immediately around the spider are the most exclusive secret societies. Many of those don't have names. They're much harder to track and to uncover that way. And then you come into the secret society the level that we do know, you know, the Freemasons. And I'm not talking about Bill and Joe down the bloody lodge in Adelaide. I'm talking about the inner core, the Freemasons, the Knights of Malta, Knights Templar, Opus Dei, the inner core of the Jesuit order, the Skull and Bones in America. I mean, a lot of them. But they have an interlocking leadership, an interlocking control system. And then you come out of the web to the outside of the hidden part of the web, which connects directly into the spider ultimately. And you have what I call the cusp organizations. This is where the hidden meets the seen. And the role of cusp organizations is to take the agenda from the hidden and play it out into the world of the seen through governments, government agencies, corporations, banking systems, media, education system, all these things, medical system, big time through the World Health Organization, which is was created by this cult in 1948 through the Rockefellers, and is now run by Bill Gates, who's a Rockefeller gopher. And then at this cusp, you've got the Bilderberg Group, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Royal Institute of International Affairs in London, the Club of Rome, created in 1968, specifically to exploit the environment, environmental concerns, to justify the centralization of global power. That is where, in effect, the global warming hoax originally came out of. And then also in this cusp group, you've got this worldwide explosion of non-governmental organizations, NGOs, the prime most important of them, often funded by George Soros, a cult operative, big time. And also these so-called think tanks. And their role, like I say, is to take although the great majority of people in these organizations have no idea. The compartmentalization is fierce in terms of knowledge, but their role is to then play out the same policy in the world of the seen. So in the COVID era, you've seen how the centralization of power works, where basically what the World Health Organization has said is what its member states have done. And you've got that WHO organization officially headed by Tedros, who's an absolute crook beyond belief. He has to be. He was appointed by Bill Gates. And now they are negotiating a treaty which will enshrine in law the fact that when there's another pandemic, that's what they're planning, bird flu, etc. And they're not finished with COVID yet either. Look at China. The idea is the next pandemic, it will be enshrined in law that what the World Health Organization, i.e. the cult, says every country must do. And at the same time, it's happening in Australia. It's happening in Britain big time through something called the Online Safety Bill. It's happening in Canada. It's happening in other countries. They are bringing out legislation to target the alternative media.
Yeah, they're doing that in Australia too, David. That certainly is coming, and it's such a shame. The party that I had previously belonged to, the Liberal National Party, is a conservative party. I still think of myself as a conservative, and one of the things that I want to conserve is freedom. And yet, we railed in this country against the Labor government not so long ago for actually wanting to set up some regulator for the press, for the free press. To me, I'm also a former journalist. I mean, that's anathema. The free press, you don't have government sort of running a rule over things. But yet here is a Conservative Party in this country that is going down the track of actually setting up a regulator that is going to look over what independent media organisations and what independent citizen journalists are saying on social media and online platforms. It beggars belief that, a bit over a decade ago, we were railing against the same attempts to regulate the free press, and now we're going to do it to essentially the independent press.
This infiltration, what they haven't created, like they created the World Health Organization, but what they haven't directly created, they infiltrate. And so around the world, I mean, take the British example. We've got a Conservative Party, well, in name only, that has overseen the fascism in Britain over, quote, COVID in the last 2 years. And we have an opposition Labour Party that has opposed the Conservative Party in the last 2 years, not on the basis of the fascism, but on the basis of what they were proposing wasn't fascist enough. Yeah. So we have a one-party state in Britain. You have a one-party state, as you well know, in Australia, and we have a one-party state in America. I mean, all this Trump stuff. Yeah. Okay, I'll see you later. But you look at the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, and they're increasingly the same. I mean, there's a governor in Utah, which is a very conservative state, who is as woke as you can imagine, and he's a Republican. So this infiltration, because all you've got to do is control the system, and then you put into positions of power who you want. So what's been, of course, exposed in the last few months is this Klaus Schwab World Economic Forum Young Leaders School, and the graduates of which have been in key positions of political power throughout the last 2 years. In New Zealand, I think Morrison was one of them, so I read. In Australia, but you've got Ardern in New Zealand, you've got Trudeau in Canada, you've got Macron in France, you've got Newsom, this fascist guy in governor of California. Look at the key extremists, and they're invariably been put in there by the World Economic Forum.
I'm actually not sure that Morrison was, but certainly some of his ministers and backbenchers have been. The interesting thing in Australia
in terms of Morrison, what I've read, I mean,
I got to be honest, I'm not 100% sure.
Absolutely are, because Klaus Schwab has admitted it.
Yeah, he's bragging about it. And the interesting thing is that when this whole Great Reset agenda popped up, Morrison went on some hookup because no one was allowed to travel anywhere and see other people. So he went on some global leaders hookup, and he actually made the statement. And I thought, wow, this is really pointed. He said, we don't need a reset. What we need to do is just get on with it. And, it was just so against the grain. And I thought, wow, that's a message. But now he's up on stage with the World Economic Forum, probably another online hookup, telling him that they're going to do the World Economic Forum's bidding when it comes to the digital identity system. So something happened on the way to the Colosseum, and I don't know what it was, but anyway, it's very bizarre that you go from rejecting the reset through to wanting to adopt the digital identity system, which is at the heart of the reset.
Yeah, and of course, politicians tell you what you want to hear anyway, and then do the opposite. So if it suits them to say one thing at one time, they'll say it. Suits them to say the opposite another time, they'll say that. But in terms of control, you've got the place people. Most of them not very bright. That's why they're place people. And then you've got others that the cult has something on. I mean, one of the kind of personalities that they like to put into power are people with not just skeletons in the cupboard, but whole cemeteries, or anything that if it came out, they'd be destroyed. They like people like that because then they do what they're told. I mean, anyone think Bill Clinton was ever going to push back on the cult? Not that he wanted to, but any idea, thought that he would? Of course not, because he knows the consequences. This is the way they do it. And so many people are blackmailed in this way by, okay, you want to go against us, that's fair enough, but this is going to have to come out then. And that's why you see so many people, they go into politics, well, on the face of it, with absolutely, decent intent. And then they become everything they went into politics to challenge. And they support everything they went into politics to challenge. So there's a lot of that goes on, as well as the place people.
Mm-hmm. So you really dived right into that. I want to go back over the spider and the web analogy and the idea of the cult, because I've heard you talk about the cult before. I've heard you talk about other terms such as the mind prison, and your words again. You say that we're effectively living in some kind of program. Can you just tell me, who is or who are what you label the spider? Who is or who are the cult? And what proof points do we have for it, David?
Well, if you go deep enough at that spider level, it's not human. And what happened is that in the early 1990s, I came across a lot of information that was about the fact that the world is not controlled by who we appear to see controls it, and there's this web, there's this cult, and I've added more and more and more to that. I mean, some of the books here are absolutely massive works, but then you think, well, when did this bloody start? Because this hasn't been going for 5 years or even 50 years. It's been going for much longer than that. It's been incremental. And the process of moving to present time has been centralization of power. So if you go far enough back, you find that people organize themselves in tribes. And the people in the tribe decided what happened in the tribe. Then we had this massive change where lots of tribes came together in what we call nations. Now a few people at the center of the nation are dictating to all the former tribes. And the whole process through the ages has been centralization of power, centralization of power. The next stage was, in terms of this, was things like the European Union, where lots and lots of nations came together under the centralized dictatorship, not even of elected politicians in truth. That's just a cover story. The politicians, they've decided that, have they really? So what are the bureaucrats saying? Because that's what's going to happen. Yeah. So you've got a bureaucratic control of all these former nations. So what you're going all the time is fewer and fewer people are deciding the lives of more and more people. Because if there's a few of you, and compared with the global population, this cult is tiny, in full knowledge, that level of it, then you have to centralize decision making. Because the more diversity you have, you can't control it from any central point. That's why they want to take that away. So one of the big points in the time that this cult went global, because you can track it back to Babylon and that kind of part of the world, but not only there, but that's the one you can comfortably trace through the Roman Empire, etc. And you had this cult eventually move the center of its operations into Europe, not least Britain and England even more. And that's when we had the colonization of the world out of Europe, not least Britain. And what happened is these European countries, they took over these countries. And then we had this period of decolonization, which was a sleight of hand, because while the countries of the occupying countries appeared to roll back their control and give, quote, independence, they left behind in those countries the secret society network and many of the bloodline families that operate the network. And they've gone on controlling those countries ever since. But it's been covert, not overt, which is the greatest form of control. So you persuade people that they have freedom, that they are dictating their own lives, while it's being fundamentally controlled. And so you had this colonization was really the time when the cult went global. And then we went into this period of what's called globalization. What is that? It's the centralization of power in every area of our lives. This is where the 1% or less than 1% in truth came from. It's the constant centralization of power. So now we have a single man in Bill Gates, who's a gopher for the Rockefellers, like I say, who is dictating the policy of the World Health Organization, which is dictating the policy of the member states. And he wants a treaty now to make that absolutely law, and not just the way it is, but law. And so we've reached a point where a tiny number of people, quite demonstrably, are running things. So my next question was, okay, so what's been happening through all this period is that people have been born, they've played a part in advancing this agenda, an agenda which certainly in that lifetime they would never see reach fruition. And then other people have come in and they've taken it on and they've died. And then other people have come in and they've taken it on. And I looked at this and I thought, there has to be a common controlling force that has spanned this period and is actually the coordinating force behind it. So the next thing was, well, if it's not been happening for 5 years or 50 years, then history must record it, even if you have to look deeply. So I started looking at different cultures around the world. And I found one extremely common theme of a non-human force that was manipulating human society from the hidden. And that in the end, what was behind it, what is behind everything, what is behind every piece of behavior, is not actually even a non-human physical form that expresses itself like that. It's a state of consciousness. And so when you start to look across the religions and across the cultures that are not religion in that sense, you start to see this common theme. So if you look at Christianity, they talk about the devil, Satan, and demons. You look at the Gnostic belief system, which is described in the Nag Hammadi texts found at a place called Nag Hammadi, 70 odd miles north of Luxor in Egypt in 1945, I think it was. And they go back, these writings found in this earthen jar, to around, it's estimated, around 400 AD. And they describe a state of consciousness, you might call it, which they call Yaldabaoth. That's the Christian devil. Just look at the way they describe it. And then you talk about archons, which is Greek for rulers, and that's the Christian demons. You go into the Zulu belief system in South Africa, same thing. You have the Chitahuri, the children of the serpent, and the force that's manipulating from the shadows. You go into Islam, and you get the jinn. So I'm in a taxi going from New York Airport to the city a few years ago, quite a few years now ago, and he's a Muslim taxi driver. And he said, "What are you doing these days?" I said, "Well, I'm investigating, this, that, and the other." And I told him I was researching the Gnostics and the archons at that time and what they said in these texts found in the earthen jar in 1945. And I told him, what they said and what they said about the archons, etc. And he said to me, he said, that sounds just like the jinn, because that's what it was. You see, one of the things that happens is this force gets different names in different cultures. Of course it does. And then people take them to be different forces or different belief systems, when actually, if you look at it and the way they're describing what they're talking about the same thing. So in America, in the Native American culture, you have the concept of Wetiko. Well, Wetiko is what the name used by a tribe called the Cree. And what is Wetiko? They say it's a mind virus that basically takes over the mind, takes over the perception, and is manipulating human society via the human mind. And then, you start to look at the way all these different cultures describe these different concepts, and you realize they're the same concept. And it's a non-human force, which does take a non-human form in terms of form, but behind it, the foundation of it, it's consciousness. It's a very inverted, chaotic, what we would call evil, which I define as the absence of love, state of consciousness. And it's been infiltrating the human psyche to try to assimilate the human psyche, the human mind, the human perceptual processes into itself, so humanity becomes an expression of it. And this is one of the key reasons that this cult, through its various expressions, like Silicon Valley and so on, have openly said they want to connect the human brain to AI by 2030. And you've got Elon Musk, who's of course a man of the people, who started this Neuralink company to connect the human brain to computers, etc. So all this is all part of it. The idea is that, or the question that's never asked is, what is AI? Okay, it's algorithms on one level, yeah, okay, but what is the kind of AI that they're talking about that they want to connect to the human brain? I say it's this non-human force, which the Native Americans call Wetiko. And they're very openly saying, people like Ray Kurzweil at Google, that once that connection is made, then AI will do more and more of human thinking until human thinking as we know it is basically negligible. And what's happened, George, is, I said this was coming, it had to happen, it's hardly a prophecy. You can manipulate below the radar for a certain amount of time and put things in place which people don't see. But when your goal is a transformation of human society, what Schwab calls the Great Reset, we called the New World Order before, but it's the same thing, then there comes a point where you can't hide it because it's happening. People are seeing it. That's where we are. And so what they've gone from is hiding it mode to sales pitch mode. And now you look at the statements of Schwab and all these people, and Kurzweil and his like around the world.
They're not doing a good job though, David. I mean, the sales pitch of you'll own nothing and be happy really didn't have a good ring to it. So why are they failing in some respects?
Because they are having to tell you what the plan is, and they're having to try to convince you that it's a good thing and it's great. So look at Kurzweil at Google, and he's saying that when we are connected to AI, we'll be like the gods. We'll be superhuman. No, we'll be post-human, and he knows it because he's another bloody psychopathic crook. This effort now to shut down the alternative media is getting more and more hysterical for many reasons. Here's two. One, the COVID period was successful to a point for them, but nothing like as successful as they wanted it to be, because despite the censorship, enough people were alerted to what is going on. And the second thing is They want to shut down the alternative media because they know what connecting AI to the human brain is all about. Elon Musk knows, bloody fraud. And therefore, they have to stop that information circulating so that only their narrative, that will make you superhuman, is that anyone ever hears. So the alternative media has been a real problem for these psychopaths. That's why they're trying to shut it down, because if you know, this is what I've tried to do over the last 32 years, is to uncover what the plan is, circulate it, so you preempt the plan. So when the plan plays out, people say, hold on a minute, that bloke or this bloke or that bloke said this was coming. And suddenly the plan as it unfolds is questioned where it wouldn't have been before. Oh, yeah, just another random event happening. No, hold on a minute. No, they said this was coming. And I say, this bloke, that bloke, there's a lot of women in the alternative media as well doing fantastic work. So this is why they want to shut us down, because of the effect we're having. But the goal, going back to this bigger picture, is I've been saying this for decades, to assimilate the human mind into this Wetiko consciousness, into this satanic consciousness, however you want to describe it.
So that's the plan. Ultimately, what you're saying is the plan is control, because that's I'm not 100% on board with the mind virus, but what it sounds like ultimately is some form of control. And
but what makes people locked down, go into house arrest meekly, without question, in the spring of 2020? What makes people not want to do it but do it anyway? It's a mind virus called fear.
Yes, fear. That 100%.
The mind virus, the Wetiko mind virus, at its foundation, is what we call fear. That's why they use it on us, and they're trying to frighten us into everything. Because fear is a very low vibrational state of consciousness, state of energy. And if they can pull you into it, then they're pulling you into basically a mind prison. And, like I said earlier, you can't control 8 billion people when there's a few of you. Physically, I mean, they want to do that. And that's what the idea of the AI control is, because they'll control you physically by controlling your mind. But before that, they can't do that. What they have to do is control your perception so you behave the way they want you to behave. So they controlled the perception in the spring of 2020 that there was a deadly virus. Now, that made people, because they took on that perception without question, meekly lock down and allow a handful of people to put them under house arrest. And if they'd just gone out and carried on with their lives, it was unenforceable. But they didn't. They did what they were told. You've got another group that really doesn't want to do it, but they're too frightened not to do it. Well, what's the consequences for me of not doing what I'm told? And that leaves this third group, which is those that can see it and won't cooperate with it. And that's where the change is going to have to come from, because it's not going to come from those two unless they move to the third group at some point.
What you said before about the partial success of the powers that be in the whole pandemic, in inverted commas, pandemic. What we saw was not only people agreeing to be locked in their own homes like prisoners, but people agreeing to wear products on their face compulsorily that really did nothing. We have seen people agree to basically the removal of bodily autonomy. And now this is one of the big ones, David. Essentially we've got this quasi-forced vaccination in Australia. I presume it's also happened to a certain degree in the UK, where people have been threatened with their jobs if they don't comply, if they don't actually take a vaccine. People have been refused services. They're still being refused services for not taking the vaccine. And so there's been a lot of people speculating about the vaccines themselves, more than speculation. I mean, there's some people some medical professionals that are actually out there showing a lot of evidence around those vaccines. Do you think this had anything to do with the vaccines, or did the whole exercise really just have to do with control?
Oh, but the fake vaccines, because not really vaccines.
Yeah, I should be using inverted commas when I say that word too. Sorry.
They're all part of the control, because I mean, the level of control we're talking about is not you will do this, it's you will do it anyway because we control your mind. So let's look at some of the background to that. What I've been saying over the years of the books is they are seeking, they're on a process of changing fundamentally the nature of the human body, from the biological one that we have to a much more synthetic biological body. And this is all part of this connecting to AI and the smart grid and all that stuff. And it's not a surprise and not an accident then that this mRNA and these fake vaccines is synthetic genetic material. And then you look, and there's been some Australian revelations about this in the last few days I was looking at. But they've come in from different parts of the world now, from scientists and doctors who've looked at these vials and looked at the blood of people who've had this fake vaccine. And they've seen nanotechnology that is self-replicating and its use of graphene, etc. And what it's in part doing, what it's transforming the human body genetically. This is why synthetic biology is one of the great burgeoning disciplines of mainstream science now. But this self-replicating building of these networks in the body, which they're showing develop, is to connect people to the smart grid. Everything connects. Everything connects if you go deep enough. So at the same time, they are creating this receiver transmission system. That's what it is in the body artificially. They are putting up, Elon Musk again, Mr. Fraud. They are putting up low orbit satellites by their thousands have been given permission already to fire 5G and Wi-Fi in general at every inch of the planet. So this is what Kurzweil talks about. He says what we're going to do is connect the human brain to the cloud. The cloud. What is the cloud? It's being generated by on-ground transmitters and masts, and it's being generated from low-orbit satellites. And why satellites? Because if you are going to connect the entirety of the human race to the cloud, then the cloud has to be everywhere. This is why, over the years, I pointed out in the books that these companies have been, Musk among them, have been putting up these satellites to fire this stuff at like sub-Saharan Africa. So you're giving people in sub-Saharan Africa, just desperate to find food every day, a lot of them, the ability to go onto Instagram and CNN. I mean, what are you doing? Of course it's not for that reason. It's because they're building this cloud that's supposed to cover every inch of the planet. Therefore, everyone is subject to being connected to it. And this is AI control. So the idea is that what is 5G, for instance, with 6G and 7G to come? 5G is a delivery system. It's a delivery system of specific frequencies that carry specific information. Now, that information can affect you physically. I mean, we see a physical body, what we think is physical body anyway, but actually it's within a field, an electromagnetic field of information. And when that electromagnetic field of information is in a balanced state, a harmonious state, that's what we call being well, being healthy. Once you start creating chaos in that field, it plays through to the body, because the holographic body, which is what it actually is, and this electromagnetic field of information, they are actually different expressions of the same information field. And so you disrupt that. Oh, just think what 5G is doing to the human energetic field, and you create not only physical health problems by this disruption, you create psychological problems. And what you can do through this delivery system is deliver perception direct into the human mind. That's what it's for. And that's why you've got this cloud being created to interact with the human mind and to interact with the human body via these self-replicating networks in the body that are happening as a result of these jabs. And you become nothing more than like a computer terminal on someone else's internet. What you think, your bodily state, it's all being externally controlled. This is the idea. I've done a lot of research and talked to a lot of people who have had 5G masts near them, and it's devastating for many people. Both their health, their psychology, their stress levels, all of it have gone up since this was turned on, and it's been turned on in Britain, since around the turn of the year. And it's interesting that the first city, so I see, in which 5G was switched on in a big way anyway, was Wuhan, China, in kind of late 2019. So everything connects, but the bottom line of everything is to control human perception, thus human behavior. And the more control you have of a perception, the more control you have of a behavior. And that's what this cloud is all about.
So you've probably read my background. I'm someone who comes from the Christian sort of belief system, and I am a Christian. And when you talk about that force, a demonic force sort of in control or seeking further control in this world, I mean, that fits in exactly with my belief system.
I'm not a Christian. It fits in with mine.
I know that you're not, and this is actually a key question that
This is the thing. It connects. Everything connects in the end. If you just put aside the wording and the
labels, yep,
it connects. We're actually saying the same thing in so many ways.
I agree. There's a lot of truth to be found across belief systems, but my belief system though has the Savior, literally the Savior, coming to end it all and take us to a better place. What I think though, without that particular aspect, that the bad guys win, and therefore when I look at the earth, the system that we're in, civilization, if I can call it that, I actually don't see salvation for it. I think that right now we're in a period of trying to hold back what possibly is going to be inevitable. And so, some people say, oh, you're black-pilled, I'm very pessimistic. But I've heard from you, despite all that you've said today, which sort of leaves you feeling, wow, if this is all correct, then why bother? But I hear optimism from you. And you don't have that same belief that I do about the Saviour that's going to come and, wipe the slate clean and fix everything. So where does this optimism come from, David?
Well, for me, if people want to find a Saviour, they should find a mirror. And because I think it's important that people don't look outside of themselves, constantly looking for a savior. Trump's going to be our savior. Yeah, well, that turned out well, didn't it? But it's the fact that we have enormous power if only we would realize the true nature of the I and the true power that we have, and we realize that the power this cult has is not the cult's power, it's the power we give to the cult in all its various expressions in the form of acquiescence. So when I look at nearly 8 billion people, and then I look at the fact that the inner core of this cult, you get into a single room, I see a way out of this. They're not trying to control human perception and censor alternative information for a bit of fun. They're doing it because they have to do it, because they are in a very precarious position. So if we look at the world, there are two worlds in one world, and the difference between the two is knowledge. You've got the human world, the target world, and that is overwhelmingly, certainly in the mainstream, really restricted, seriously restricted in terms of the knowledge it's allowed to have. So it's not an accident that people like J.D. Rockefeller and his like actually created the whole foundation of what we call ludicrously call the education system. The education system, and when I was growing up and going to school in the 1950s and 60s, it wasn't even close to the extreme of indoctrination that it is now. So they've set up an indoctrination system, a perceptual download indoctrination system called education. They have the same perceptions downloaded in ludicrously called education going out through the mainstream media. The same ones going out through uncensored through Silicon Valley, and if you challenge it, censored. So they've set up a system whereby kids come out of the womb and immediately from cradle to grave are bombarded with a certain perceptual belief system. On the other side, the other world is the world of the cult. And that's a network of secret societies. Why do they have secret societies? To keep secrets from who? From the population. So, and indeed, through compartmentalization from the great majority of the people in the cult in terms of the real agenda. So what's happening is over here in the cult world, generation after generation is being initiated into knowledge about the nature of reality, how we interact with it, and what reality is, what we are, and what the goal of the cult is. That's being passed over through the initiations of the cult, while that same information is systematically denied to population. So one of the things that we have to absolutely cast aside, I would say, is the idea that this cult is all powerful. No, it's not. It's a bunch of prats. They are. I mean, have you seen Bill Gates and Klaus Schwab? I mean, can anyone take those people seriously? Pair of bloody morons. They may have some understanding about how to manipulate the psyche, although they're just gophers for people deeper in the cult. But I mean, they're morons. I mean, Bill Gates. What? How does that guy do what he's doing? Because he's super intelligent? Well, absolutely not. Schwab, super intelligent? Absolutely not. So how do they do it? Well, it's done because, if you look at one of the major symbols, these people love symbols because symbols talk to the subconscious. That's why they use them. And one of the key symbols of this cult is the all-seeing eye, the single all-seeing eye. And that is actually describing the situation perfectly, because in the kingdom of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. So they are the one-eyed man. They're not the all-powerful. They're a bunch of prats. You don't want power over people like they do unless you're a moron. And by the way, also massively insecure. Show me a control freak, I'll show you an insecure person that the control is trying to placate. That's why this cult would not be comfortable in any situation where it couldn't call the outcome. That's why the alternative media, which is affecting the outcome through information, terrifies it, because it can't control the outcome because it's not controlling information. That's why it's trying to up the ante on that all the time. So if it was involved in a football match, it would not be happy just controlling one side and see how the game goes. It wants to control both sides. It wants to control the referee and know what the score is going to be before the game kicks off. That's its mentality. So to do that, it has to control everything. That's why I say it's placating its own insecurity, because it knows if the population in large enough numbers starts to wake up to the game, it's freaking over, and it knows it. So what it's done with its one eye, symbolically, is to make humans blind. And that's the dynamic. It's not that they're powerful and humans aren't. It's that through the suppression of knowledge, awareness, not least awareness of the true I, which is eternal consciousness, it has become the kingdom of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. So if enough people start to awaken, not just to what's going on, but to the nature of the true self and the power of the true self, and the ability of the true self to impact on its own reality, the game's up. It bloody knows it. And so it's never over. You know, if there was 8 billion people here doing the manipulating and a handful of people here being manipulated, the game's up. But the opposite's the case. So the game's not up. And the reason that they're trying to get AI control of the human mind is to placate its insecurity so it controls the fact with the AI connection that the human mind will not wake up because the AI won't let it. And that's where it's going. And but, you know, I'm remain very optimistic that we can bring this down because, you know, if you look at a dam, it can take a hell of a long time for the cracks to start to appear in a dam. That body of water, it can take phenomenal amounts of time for that to happen. But from the moment the cracks start to appear to the whole thing collapsing can be very short. And we are seeing the cracks in the dam. We are. I mean, you're talking to someone who's been doing this for 32 years. I remember what it was like in 1990 and 91 and 92 and 93 and 94 and 95 and so on. Virtually no one wanted to know. I couldn't fill a bloody small room. I couldn't fill a phone booth with interest. Yet now, whoa, it's phenomenal compared with that. So we are seeing the cracks. You know, you look at, I don't do it very often, but, you know, when I do, you'll see something, you know, like Klaus Schwab will say something or something, and there'll be comments underneath. And before, if he'd have said the same thing, there would have been supportive comments or not many. And now suddenly people are getting it. Comment after comment. This is why you're saying it. This is where you want to go. So, you know, there's lots to be optimistic about. And because I've been doing this for so long, I remember what it used to be like. I can understand why people who are relatively new to this say, why aren't more people waking up? Oh dear, the numbers are phenomenal compared with what they were, and it becomes exponential. And once people start to get what the game is, it's a phrase I use, know the outcome and you'll see the journey, know where they want to take us, and you'll see the steps that they're using to take us there with so-called random events that aren't. And the more people are aware of what the goal is, the more streetwise they become every day. When there's another news story or another announcement, they can start to see more and more why that is happening, not just what's happening, but why it's happening. So there's a lot to be optimistic about. There really is. But in the next 2 to 3 years, to like the end of 2024 into 25, we are going to be subjected to machine gun fire of challenges to try to break our spirit. And the idea is you give so many people so many challenges to respond to that while they're just getting their heads around this one, another one's coming. And then that one, another one's coming. That's what they're going to do. And so we have to be calm. We have to be immovable. And we have to realize that the world that we've lived in is not the world that we're going to live in the next few years. And we have to keep our focus not on why can't I do this like I did before. Keep the focus on we're going to bring this down. We are going to have freedom reign. We are. And whatever we have to take, we'll take. But we are going to bring this down. And so I remain very optimistic, because when I look at this and have looked at it over these decades, this whole conspiracy, while it seems all powerful, it's hanging by a bloody thread. And that thread is human ignorance that there is a conspiracy. And more people are ceasing to be ignorant. And what we've got to do now, George, is get people from just from seeing it to crossing the street and ceasing to cooperate with it. Because 8 billion people can't be told what to do or forced what to do if they won't cooperate. And this power that this cult's supposed to have, it doesn't. Bunch of prats, is the power that the population give to it in the form of acquiescence. That's what happens. Because this cult works through all these different authorities, it works through governments, it works through banking systems and corporations and Silicon Valley and all that stuff. Because of that, all these different forms of authority, when you give your power to this authority, you're giving your power to the cult that is behind authority, although most authority hasn't got a clue that's the case. And so if we stop doing that, if we say to authority, okay, you want me to do that? Okay, give me the evidence. Give me the evidence why I should do that. Show me. Where's your evidence? You haven't got any. Oh, okay, well, I'm not doing it then. Okay, you want me to wear a face nappy, a face diaper? Okay, show me the evidence that it's worth it, and show me the evidence that it's not going to damage me or my kids psychologically or breathing in the shite that's in it. Show me that now. And every time, if people had done that in the COVID 2 years so far, no evidence would have been produced because there isn't any. The only evidence they could produce on the face mask is how bad they were for your health and your psychology. Mm-hmm. So instead of just doing it, this is group number one. Instead of just doing it, ask for bloody evidence. And if it's not forthcoming, credible evidence, don't do it. And group number two, who doesn't want to do it, but does it because it's frightened of not doing it, well, do you think it's going to end here? Do you think it's going to stop here? You have no idea where this is supposed to go in terms of extreme. So are you going to just go on acquiescing until you get to the really extreme level, and for your kids and grandkids, or are you going to stand up saying no now? And you know, this second group that doesn't want to do it but is frightened of not doing it, there's great potential there, and it's already happening to move to group number three, which says I can see what's going on and I ain't cooperating with it. Yeah, and that's the group that has brought down every tyranny in history and will bring down this one, because it will get bigger. See, one of the things that you well know that's happened is a lot of people have gone from this group, even this group, to this one by having the jab on the basis of it will protect you from this alleged virus, but it doesn't. If like in Britain, as an example, but it's happened in other countries too. You must have that. What they said in Britain, the British government, is to care workers in the second half of 2021. If you don't have the jab, you're going to get sacked. And they sacked them. And the reason they sacked them is A, they don't care about all people, but also because the numbers that wouldn't have it weren't enough to cause the kind of problem that would be impossible to respond to. Then they said, okay, in early 2022, every person working for the National Health Service has to have the jab or you're going to get sacked in this state. What happened? The numbers who said, well, we're not having it anyway, were so big that at the last minute they had to drop it. And that's the point. There's so many people being manipulated and so few people in full knowledge doing it, that if people just said, no, we're not cooperating, this will come down very quickly.
Yeah,
so I'm very optimistic. But the next few years are going to be challenging beyond belief, not least economically.
Mm-hmm. Well, look, you've given us more than an hour of your time, David Icke, and it's been a roller coaster ride. I want to thank you very much for it. You're one of those people like Alex Jones, who's just about banned from everything. You're censored from all of the mainstream platforms, and being now a former politician, you're probably someone that they'd say I shouldn't talk to. But that's why I want to talk to you. Because I think that in what you've said, there's some things that I agree with, some things that I don't. It's not up for me to say what's right and what's not. That's for the viewers and their perception. And I'm very glad that you've been here to give us that sort of worldview that you have. I think that there is a fair bit of truth in it. And I want to thank you for the time you've shared here. Can I also just ask you to do two things. Tell people where they go to see or read or hear more from David Icke. And also you might want to just tell them a bit about your most recent book, which I think is a great read, Perceptions of a Renegade Mind.
Yeah, well, the main hub for me personally is davidicke.com. That's where all my videos are. And we put news stories up in context, why they're happening, not just that they're happening every day. And all my books are going back right into the 1990s, are all available on davidicke.com. And we've got a media platform called Iconic, which was created by my son, Jamie, not much more than 2 years ago. It's been phenomenally successful. And it's like an alternative Netflix, really. I mean, it's just, there's series and films, original films and documentaries and on all the subjects, alternative subjects, not just conspiracy, on all subjects, nature of reality, all of it. I've just done a 13-part series on the nature of reality with special effects being used and stuff like that. And all my talks and that side of things that I've done going back into the 1990s are all there too. So they're the two major places, and people can get a 7-day free trial on Iconic, and they can see what they think of it without actually spending anything. Of course, davidicke.com is, you go there anytime. And there's that. And there's Perceptions of a Renegade Mind, which is kind of what we've been talking about. Yeah. Because what is a renegade mind? A renegade mind is not just a critically thinking mind, because there's many people who critically think and see it and go, oh God, I can see what's going on, but my God, I'm not going to challenge that. What are the consequences for me? Whereas a renegade mind critically thinks, sees it, and then says, I'm not having it. I'm not cooperating with it. I'm not doing what it's telling me. And it's renegade minds that will bring that dam down.
Indeed it will. Well, from one renegade to another, thank you very much. Look forward to hearing more from you in the future, and perhaps chatting again at some point down the line.
Okay, George. Thanks, mate. Bye.
Thank you.